everyone. Welcome to today's live stream, How to Pass Social Studies. I believe we're going to give you 7 tips today to do just that. My name's Jen. I'm the Student Success Coach here at Essential Education. Thrilled to come to you in this format because there's nothing an educator loves to do more than to equip their students with what they need to succeed. And one of the things as we learn as teachers going through the paces of learning how to best impart that information to students is that learning is most effective when it's meaningful, when it has an impact on your everyday life. But often we hear from students, why do I have to learn this? I am never going to use this in my everyday life. But fortunately, social studies is one of those topics, believe it or not, that you will use in your everyday life because the past, learning about the past, reading about the past, gives us perspective on both our future, things that we deal with as a people and as a culture here and now, and on the future, where we want to go, where we hope to be as a country, as a culture, as a community. And so learning about social studies will help you do just that. We had a great opportunity in a study session earlier this week to read a passage about nonviolent protest from Martin Luther King Jr. from a speech from 1957. And as we discussed the passage, many of the students noted, hey, this sounds really familiar to some of the things that we're dealing with today. And it's that kind of thing that we can geek out on as teachers to say, yes, that's exactly why we do what we do, so that you can learn and gain that perspective, especially when it comes to a topic like social studies that will give you that extra boost that you need to be a part of the conversation, to engage in your culture and in your community. But even if I haven't convinced you the importance of studying for social studies just for the sheer intrinsic benefit of it, let me tell you, if you want to pass the GED, HiSET, or TASC and get your high school equivalency credential, social studies is part of it. So you have to get ready to take on this test, and hopefully you'll learn and have some fun along the way. So again, we're going to give you 7 tips to better prepare for and pass social studies. And the first one is super obvious. You gotta prepare. You have to prepare and you have to prep. We often say the best way to pass is to prepare to pass. And we've got you covered here at Essential Education with our personalized lesson plans that we can put together for you to give you the exam-specific information you need to take on the GED, HiSET, or TASC. But in addition to the content information, what you need to know to answer questions on the test, we also want to give you preparation when it comes to knowing what to expect on those individual tests. Because as you know, while that general content is the same for GED, HiSET, or TASC, the way the test makers ask the question can vary greatly from test to test. So let's review a little bit about each of the 3 tests and what to expect when it comes to your social studies exam. For GED, you're only going to have 35 questions and you have 70 minutes to answer those 35 questions. But if you know this already in looking at other aspects of the GED likes to have a lot of question variety in those 35 questions. They also like to throw what I call twofers in there, meaning there's more than one blank to be filled in each question. You're going to not only interact with multiple choice questions, but multiple select questions, drag and drop, fill in the blank. All of these different question types add a lot of variety into the way that test makers on the GED are going to put you through the paces. So be prepared for that. So 35 questions of all different varieties in 70 minutes for the GED for social studies. When it comes to HiSET, you're going to have 60 questions in 70 minutes, but guess what? They're all multiple choice, so you know exactly what to expect in your testing format type. When it comes to TASC, you're also going to see multiple choice questions. TASC is going to give you 48 to 49 multiple choice questions depending on which form and which format you take the test in. And if you're taking the test in English, you'll have 75 minutes to complete those questions. And if you're taking the test in Spanish, you'll have 80 minutes to complete those 48 to 49 questions. So that's your ins and outs of the test, and we could talk a little bit more about that. If you'd like some more resources, feel free to reach out to us. We can give you the rundown of each of those subject exams and those exams itself here at Essential Education. So that's your first step. The best way to pass is to prep, is to prepare to pass. The second, when it comes to social studies, it's helpful. It's not mandatory, but it is extremely helpful to just get some background info, especially when it comes to civics and U.S. history, because that really is the bulk or a lot of the content type of the social studies parts of your high school equivalency exams. You can do this in your lessons, however you're preparing. Certainly if you're with Essential Education, your units and your individual lessons within those units will focus on different time periods and ask you to interact with historical readings from those time periods. And you can't help but along the way, as you're reading those passages, as you're reading excerpts from different areas of time, you can't help but learn a little bit more about that time. And I encourage you, if you find something that sparks your interest, you are really interested in the Civil War, or you're really interested in the Civil Rights Movement, or you're really interested in a different aspect of government and the branches of government, dig in a little bit deeper. If that's something that sparks your interest, build that meaning in your learning. Do a quick Google search. Find some other things that you can bring to the table, other readings that you can bring to the table, not necessarily for test prep, but just to build your general understanding. Because when you then encounter passages from that given area on the test, you can say, hey, I've already read a little bit about this. Hey, I feel a little bit more confident and more prepared to take this on because I've built some background information. And again, now more than ever, as we go through changes as a society, as we've walked through changes in the last couple of years, and I'm sure there are always many more to come because change is inevitable, we can learn about the past, and that gives us perspective on our present and, yes, on our future. So that's your second tip, build your background info. Third tip, build up your social studies vocabulary. Get familiar with some of these words that you're going to see in these reading passages. We've got a great resource on our website. I'll pop that down into the comments section as we close out our time together today to link you to that social studies study guide. It's very complex, it's very robust, but get down into the table of contents, dig into that information, and one of the things you will see is a social studies glossary. And glossary is just a fancy name for a list of words that you need to know that will help you build your understanding in social studies. So dive into that, get familiar with some of those words. Sure, you can try to figure out what those words mean when you get there on test day, but if you've already got a general understanding of what those words mean ahead of time, you'll be ahead of the game. And again, it'll give you that boost of confidence when you see that word and say, oh, I read that in the social studies glossary, or that was a word that I came across in my preparation and my lessons. So build up your social studies vocabulary. And again, we'll give you that link to that very robust, important glossary and study guide in the comment section today. Our fourth tip, take notes. I know a lot of people don't like to hear that because they don't like to take notes, but if you are a read-write learner, this new emerging learning style, someone who needs to read and then needs to write down the steps to a process or the branches of government in order to fully understand that concept in social studies, then take notes. If you say, well, that's not really me, Jen, I'm not really a read-write learner, but maybe I'm a visual learner, try doodling, try making little pictures to go along, whatever you need to do to solidify the important information that you need to remember in your brain. Now, again, for these exams, as we'll talk about in just a second, you don't have to bring a lot of memorized material to the table. For instance, you're not going to need to name and number the presidents of the United States. You're not going to need to discuss war chronology and write certain dates in certain order. But it will help you to have a general understanding of things like the branches of government, to have a general understanding about important people, again, those vocabulary words. So as you come across those keywords, those key terms, those things that stand out to you or you see repeated in your lessons over and over again, take note of them. jot it down. If it's helpful for you to write the word and the definition and get some flashcards together, add that to your study plan. Maybe you just need to draw a little picture or whatever kind of symbol is going to give you that visual reminder when you get to that information on test day. Oh, I remember reading or learning about this information in my studies. So take notes or use graphic organizers as needed. The next tip, I believe we're on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're on 5. Get to understand the importance of author source and perspective. Okay, here's what that means. Generally in your social studies readings, especially for your high school equivalency exams, you're going to come across 2 different source types, a primary source and a secondary source. A primary source is going to be a source like the one I mentioned, where we were reading about an excerpt from Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech in 1957. That's a primary source because it came directly from that writer in the time frame that it was happening. Now, prior to reading that source, we read an introduction that talked about that primary source, that said the following is an excerpt from Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech on this date in 1957, and gave us a little bit more information about that time period. That would be considered a secondary source. A secondary source is somebody that writes about something that happened. They weren't there when it happened. They weren't an eyewitness to the account, but now they're writing about it. And that's a secondary source. So primary source, you're there when it's happening. You're the main author. You're there. You're the eyewitness. A secondary source, you're writing about one of those primary sources. And oftentimes on the exams, you will see secondary sources in the form of introductions to the passages. Make sure you are not skipping those introductions to any of the passages for any of the reading, but especially in social studies, because there can be key details and key insights in those introductions that will, just in the introduction, help you better answer the question. So make sure you are paying attention to those introductions and you're not skipping them. Now we get to the big bulk, the big 6. Read. You've got to bulk up your reading skills if you want to pass these social studies exams, because as I mentioned earlier, you are not going to be asked to bring a lot of memorized material to the table. You are, however, going to be asked to read about history, read historical documents from those primary and secondary sources, and make analysis, make generalization, answer comprehension questions. You're going to be asked to make inferences and find evidence. You're going to be asked to cite the main idea of the passage. And yes, you're going to be asked to weigh in on the author's opinion or the author's purpose for writing. And in order to do that, it's helpful to understand, again, where that source is coming from. If they're a primary source and they're a president writing in the midst of war and they're making a plea to the people in a presidential address, know right away you're going to see some emotional language in there, and you're also going to see some formal language in there that shapes the tone and the feel of that passage. So put your thinking cap on when you address those passages to be on the lookout for things that you might see based on who that author is, when and where they wrote it, and what opinions or perspectives they might bring. It will help you to better find the main idea. It will help you to better find those details and evidence, and it definitely points to author opinion, which is so important if you are given an argumentative essay that has that social studies base in your writing section. If you're given 2 different authors with 2 different opinions on the same topic, being able to understand how they're shaped by their source and how they're shaped by their perspective can make all the difference in you making educated choices when it comes to selecting answers. So amp up your reading. And then also make sure you're reading for the test. Have you heard that term before? Reading for the test just means in using a test-taking skill like making sure you're reading the directions and the introductions, not skipping that very important information. It also means maybe putting a reading tactic into play where before you read the passage, you jump ahead and read the questions so that you get an idea of what the test makers are going to ask before you jump into the passage, so that you can put, again, your brain on high alert to say, okay, I saw some questions that are going to ask me about main idea. I saw some questions that are going to ask me about the author's conclusion. So I'm going to look for the overall feeling, and I know that conclusion is in the last part of that passage, so I'm going to pay extra attention when I get there. Using those little reading tools to read specifically for the test can be a big help, and it's just a good test-taking rule of thumb when you're taking on any exam, but especially when you're taking on historical documents within reading for social studies. So that's number 6. Number 7, if you've been with me at all before, you know what's coming. Please, please, please make sure you are taking practice tests. Practice tests are the best, and dare I say, only way to know if you are truly ready to test. Absolutely, you are going to need to work through lessons. Absolutely, you are going to need to fill skills gaps and work through workbook pages and do that reading and bulk up your vocabulary and your background understanding. Absolutely, you need to do all that. But you must put yourself through the paces of taking some of these practice social studies exams. At minimum, maybe so you can get an idea about what some of those question types might look like that do vary for the GED, HiSET, and TASC. If you're a student with essential education, you have a 2-promise guarantee. You have the promise that we are going to provide 4 to 5 practice tests within your individual subject curriculum across the board. So you have lots of resources in that regard. And you also have the guarantee that all of our study materials, including those practice tests, are certified by and aligned to the national testing boards. So the same degree of difficulty will be used in those practice tests, and the same test maker language will be used. So you'll be able to build confidence walking into test day once you're consistently passing those social studies exams at a passing rate that you're happy with, that's above that general passing rate or maybe on up into the honors range if you're looking at college or career and vocational training. You can walk into test day, and when that little voice of uncertainty comes up, can I do this? You can say, absolutely, I can do this because I've done it before. I passed these multiple practice tests along the way. If you're not a student with essential education and you want more resources about practice tests, we've got them for you. We've got some wonderful free resources on our website that I will also put down into the comment section of today's stream together. So let's review real quick those 7 tips to pass social studies. The first one, best way to pass is to prepare to pass. Make sure you have partnered with a preparation product, whether it be us at Essential Education, an in-classroom environment, workbooks, or tutors that are full preparation aligned to your specific exam. The best way to pass is to prepare to pass. Second, make sure you're getting that background info, that if something strikes your fancy and it strikes you as odd or curious, dig into that a little bit. If you find a certain interest in an area of history, learn about it, explore it, Google it, get some extra resources to build your overall understanding, because as you build your curiosity and your understanding about the past, it can give more meaning to your studies and give you more perspective on your present and in the future. Make sure you're building that vocabulary. Make sure you look for that glossary I'm going to put in the comments. Number 4, make sure you're taking notes, even if you don't like to. If that speaks to your learning style, make sure that you are taking a note of it, so the things that you do need to commit to memory, you are adding into your long-term memory with that written note form or those graphic organizers. Number 5, make sure you are understanding your source and perspective. Understanding primary and secondary sources will be a part of these exams, and having a better understanding of the headspace that an author writes from will help you better answer questions. Number 6, make sure you are amping up your reading. Reading and reasoning is the name of the game in all of your subject exams, but especially for social studies. And then lastly, make sure you're taking those practice tests. If you want resources from us, we've got them. I'll put them down in the comments. And as always, if you have questions for us about our program, our services, or you just have questions about today's topic of social studies in general, reach out. make a comment. I'll make sure you have our contact information to talk to some of our student advisors. We are happy and able to help you because, as we always say, your full, complete success is our goal. So we want to make that happen. Get your credential this year, put your mind to it. You can pass social studies and we can help. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a great day.